Welcome to the Talking Shop podcast, where I'm here to share lessons and experiences in sports performance and professional development. Today, I'm joined by Kyle Voigt of USC. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Matt?
Good. Always a good day when I can record a podcast and catch up with friends. So Kyle has been to some pretty big name universities doing sports science and stuff like that, which I'll let him get into. But a little bit of background about how he and I know each other. I was taking advantage of this recent off time and just reaching out to college sports scientists, and he's been more than gracious to give me about 2 hours of his time on two separate occasions via phone, and now we are on the podcast about to talk some shop. So for those who are not familiar, could you please share a little bit about your background?
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. So thanks for having me. Basically, I started my undergrad at SC. So I'm a Southern California kid, born and raised in LA. My dad was a professor at SC. So I was just born and bred a Trojan. So undergrad at SC, wanted to be a doctor, did a typical route a lot of people take. So you go and you're pre-med and then your grades are crap. So you got to go do pre-PT and then your grades are crap again. And you're like, all right, well, I like sports. I like lifting weights. What could I do that would let me do that? So after I got my undergrad, I actually did an internship at UCLA, which is a great experience for me. We'll go into that maybe a little bit more if you'd like. So that was really great. I got to work under Coach Mike Lynn over there, and he taught me basically everything about the foundations of S&C. And then I was lucky enough to actually do an internship at USC right after that. So didn't even have to move, still lived in the same apartment, which was pretty awesome. And then there is where I got initially exposed to quote unquote sports science, GPS. They had a sports science coordinator at USC there. So that was awesome. And while I was at USC, I actually got a graduate assistantship at UCLA. So went back across town, still didn't have to move. And at UCLA, my role was essentially as their first GA responsible for data analytics. So that was my big role, which was taking all this data we were collecting, whether it was wellness, jumps, GPS metrics, whatever, for 21 teams, consolidating that somehow, and then pushing that data out to whoever wanted it. And I was also in charge of S&C for the cross-country team there, and I was supporting about 8 other teams, just like as a secondary coach helping on the floor. So that GA at UCLA was awesome for me because it really exposed me to being like, all right, what is quote unquote sports science? How is that different from strength conditioning? And where does that fit in the elite, like collegiate landscape? From there, I really wanted to learn more about sports science in particular. So I actually attended a conference in Long Beach, which is about 20 minutes south of LA. And I listened to a person named Tina Murray talk. She was the director at the University of Lousville at the time. And she talked about their performance code. So it was culture, operating system, data and decisions and execution. And it was awesome. I was just like, all right, she's got all these cool graphs, data and decision. You're the director. You're obviously not doing this. Who is the one that you employed to do this? And can I talk to him? So ended up talking to Paul Jones, who ended up being my boss at Louisville. So I moved out to Louisville, Kentucky, and spent a year there. And that was an incredible experience. I was essentially applied sports scientist for 2 teams, men's soccer and women's basketball, also assisting with the S&C side, and I was the S&C coach for diving. So that was probably one of the biggest, most formative experiences in my career, being away from home for the first time, really, and then also just getting to learn from some people that have been doing quote unquote sports science in collegiate for 5-6 years. And then I was fortunate enough where I'd made some contacts at USC, and they had an open position for their sports science coordinator. And essentially what happened was Pete Carroll hired the head strength coach from USC, Ivan Lewis, and Ivan took several of his staff members with him up to the Seahawks, one of which was the sports science coordinator. So that position was now open. And I happened to know the previous sports science coordinator and got really lucky, I guess, and happen to be in the role now. I've been in the role for about 9 months now. Essentially within that role, I provide sports science support to whichever teams will have me on a daily basis. That's actually our women's volleyball program and our football program. anyone familiar with collegiate athletics knows that football is a huge driver. So about 75% of my time is spent with football, and about 25% of my time is spent with women's volleyball. Also, I work a lot with our athletic training and our strength and conditioning, nutrition, basically trying to bring all the parties to the table, having everyone speak a common language and making sure we're on the same page. So if there's anything I could take from my journey so far is like definitely have a plan for where you want to go, but be ready for opportunities to show up and adapt to those. I would never have told you I would have been in the position I am in now 4 years ago. So that's my background, who I am.
Yeah, and this is a quote I shared previously on my podcast. So this is the original founder of this quote, but I don't know if it was our first or second phone call, but Kyle said, the only difference between you and me is a few people saying nice things about me. If you remember saying that quote. So if you could just touch on really quick kind of how each job progressed from UCLA to USC to UCLA to Louisville back to USC, right? That's the order. Kind of how that went down in regards to who was kind of telling you to apply where and kind of how that all came to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So completely honestly, I only applied to those first 2 internships. Those are the only ones where I saw sorry about that. I actually saw a posting and I applied for it, send the cover letter, send the resume, do the interview and show up. And that was those first two internships. I didn't even know there was a GA at UCLA. It was the first time it was created. I got a phone call while I was actually at SC. And they called me and I'm taking a phone call in the USC weight room about getting a job at UCLA. So I don't know what I did at UCLA to make them think I was qualified, but essentially
right.
they just wanted someone to handle their data. And I mean, we've talked about this on the phone before, Matt, like people don't like working with data, at least especially strength coaches. So I saw that as my niche. Okay, I actually really like this stuff. I want to be able to do this and help people utilize this information. So that's how that happened. And then that fellowship at Louisville, like I talked to, very similar to how we met, I actually hit up Paul Jones, who's the director of performance analytics at the University of Louisville. And I hit him up about 3 times. And after like the 3rd talk, he was like, hey, what are you doing after your GA? And I was like, all right, I don't know, looking for some sort of way to get paid. And he's like, well, we have this fellowship. It actually pays a little more than you're getting paid right now. And it's Louisville, so it's probably going to you could probably buy a house because it's Kentucky, man. Like rent is so cheap. So compared to LA at least. So moved out to Louisville and he basically poached me. He told me to apply. And then same thing with the sports science. I got a call in February saying, hey, I think you'd be good for this. I'm going to hook you up with my boss. Okay. Boss calls me on a Saturday. All right. Hey, I need you to officially apply for this so that you can actually be up for this job. So like they're all telling me to apply. And that's just because throughout my journey that we've just talked about, like I met certain people along that way. Now, I'll tell you straight up, not every single person I met along that way would vouch for me. And that's just the fact. Like not everyone you interact with or work with is going to say positive things about you if their reputation is on the line for that. And that's completely okay. Like I'd rather be someone who's somewhat polarizing than have everyone say something somewhat nice, but like, about you, And that's just my 2 cents about that.
Yeah. And along those lines, I want to put out there that people you network with, not everyone you're going to click with. And there's some people that I'll hang up the phone with and I'm like, oh man, that didn't really go that well. I'm probably not going to hit them up again. And, I wouldn't assume that I'm going to have, multi-hour phone calls with everyone I interact with. And that's just part of it. And talking about how people have to vouch for you, right? And when you're asking for stuff, or if that stuff kind of comes up, that's them putting their name, their reputation, their neck on the line for you. And it's very important to establish rapport with that person before you start asking for stuff. And it's definitely difficult to be patient and trust that process. But, for example, my thesis advisor, I'd worked with her for a whole semester. She knew the work I did. I was meeting with her at the beginning of my second year, so this past August. And I felt like we had gotten to know each other pretty well and everything. She knew that I'd obviously, walk the walk when it came time to do my work. And I just asked her, if there's anyone that she thought would be appropriate to reach out to in regards to just being a professional in sports science, with myself graduating this upcoming May, aka tomorrow. And she was like, oh yeah, there's this guy I'm pretty good friends with. He's a director of sports science at this hospital about an hour away. And that really hit me, because imagine if I walked into her office first day, I'm kind of just given to her because my boss had left TCU. And I'm like, oh, by the way, I'm graduating soon. Like, anyone? And just how, Paul waited till the third phone call to bring that up. Imagine if you come out of the gates a little bit too hot and it's like the end of the first phone call and it's like, hey, can I come to Louisville? As opposed to just like letting it happen. And I think that it's this fine line that I've been trying to walk with my myriad of phone calls these past few weeks, is like, we both know why I'm here. Like, it's the quote unquote network, right? That has job implications, but I'm still here to hear your stories, just connect. Like, I think this stuff is super interesting as well. So having some emotional intelligence, knowing how to kind of guide that conversation, and knowing when to choose to bring up that stuff. And to be honest, I've ended some phone calls, one literally before this. I thought it went pretty well, just a nice kind of back and forth. And I was like, man, this is that awkward part of the conversation where, before I let you go, I'm going to bring up that I am looking for jobs, and I understand that I'm asking you to put your name out, or your neck out there. But if there's anyone you feel is appropriate I contact, or a job that you hear about, please let me know. Of course, if there's anything you feel uncomfortable doing, I'm not asking you to do that. And the last two people I did that to, they said, like, I definitely understand and I respect that. And, I've enjoyed this phone call and how you've handled yourself, and I would totally feel comfortable suggesting your name. So I'm not saying every phone call goes like that, but, just to have some self-awareness and emotional intelligence about when to pick those battles, but understand that you have to be authentic and genuine in respecting them as a person. They're not just, you're not just the USC sports science coordinator, you're Kyle, and just remembering that networking is dealing with humans. And that's the end of my rant.
Oh, absolutely. But that's a great point, man. Is that, like, you see somebody, like, for example, like when I first got into this field and I got into sports science in particular, someone asked me, like, all right, Kyle, what's your dream job? What would be what you wanted? And I actually said USC sports science coordinator. I still remember saying that was my dream job. And then I got into this position and somebody asked me, okay, Kyle, like, you're in your quote unquote dream job. What would be the next step? What would be like your dream job? Okay. Director high performance US men's national team, soccer. That would be, to me, like the pinnacle of the profession, right? And ironically, so USC, I was doing some basically just canvassing, trying to learn more about AMS systems, talking to a bunch of different companies. And if you guys aren't familiar with the AMS, that's an athlete management system, which is essentially a centralized hub to house all information across different departments. And that could be anything from GPS metrics to sport information to workouts to rehab, whatever. Centralized hub for all information to go into, basically allows people to make better associations between things. So I was canvassing the market for that. And one of the companies, their director of performance science, that's his title, is the US men's national team director of high performance. Like, that was somebody that I talked to through this journey. So I'm really talking to this guy. He's been the director of high performance at Bayern Munich, German national team, AS Roma. Like, if you're familiar with soccer, these are some huge names. I'm a pretty big Bayern Munich fan myself. So, like, to talking to this guy is like, that's the idol, So, like, I'm trying to hold back a little bit and be like, all right, this guy's trying to technically sell me something. I've got to be smart about what I say here. But it's that sort of stuff too. You just don't know who you're going to talk to. But also, like you said before, like, these are just human beings, man. Like, we all deal with the same issues pretty much. And most of us can't go to work right now. So most of us are trying to figure out, all right, what do I need to learn? How can I best support my athletes at a distance? So it definitely leads on to that. And I admire you basically, like, actually outright asking people, like, hey, if you have a position, please let me know. That's something that I never did, really. And that's not to detriment you. It's more to say, like, I never felt comfortable actually asking, hey, like, I'm looking for jobs. Do you have anything? And there's a lot of people like that I talked to, and I specifically was like, all right, I'm interested in a job with this person. If I keep calling you, will you eventually like give into it? I don't know. And that's one of those hard lines. How do I say this? Obviously, us talking, like, I know that if I had a position open at USC, we had built a decent enough relationship where I'd be like, okay, Matt, I'd love for you to come in and we could talk about this position. But I don't have a position open at USC. And that's one of those hard parts is like, do you look at someone who might potentially have something now, or, okay, this guy's trying to grow a sports science department at a big time Division I university. This is a great person to know right now. I don't know if that's going to foster anything or not, but what could be the future implications of that? I think that's important to know. That's an important thing to distinguish, because who knows? I might not be at USC in 5-6 years. You might be the sports science coordinator at USC in 5-6 years. You know, it could be a completely reverse situation. That's the nature of sport, man.
Yeah, and how you kind of phrase that example is no one's going to say, oh yeah, I feel comfortable like giving you a job. It's more like, I feel comfortable putting your name out there or interviewing you for XYZ. So you definitely have to be able to walk the walk when it comes time. You know, you can't just, you know, put on your, I call it a customer service voice on the phone and try to be all professional and stuff. So if you can walk the walk, if you're professional, but you know how to be personal. I forgot, it might've been you, it might've been someone else, but they were talking about how an interview is basically just like, do they want to go get a beer with you after the interview? You know, the hard skills, and we've had this conversation, like hard skills versus soft skills, like there's specific protocols, technology, you'll learn more or less on the job, you know, but having that experience of, I've taught myself technologies before, I just understand this process, you'll learn most of the specifics on the job. But if you know how to talk to athletes, how to talk to coaching staff, how to do kind of like the finer things, that's going to go a lot farther. And not to get too much farther kind of down this rabbit hole, even though I'm sure we could, and we could do that in a 2.0 episode. 2.0 is where I have a guest on a second time, specifically on a topic, but the first one is more just for the background. But I'm sure, you know, this could go on for 2 hours like always, but last one before we get into the main questions. If you had to give like a bullet point or two definition of sports science, because we've had this conversation of like, what is it? And I think you have a pretty interesting perspective. So a bullet point or two on how you define sports science, and then we'll get into the question.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. It's actually something that a lot of people in similar positions to me get asked quite a bit. Like, all right, what is sports science? How's it different from athletic training? How's it different from strength conditioning, nutrition, psych? Sports science is a science of sport. And it sounds super lame, like you just flip the words. But essentially, all I'm doing is trying to understand sport and study sport and those that participate in sport. So there's a dissertation by a guy named Patrick Ward, who's a director of research and development at the Seattle Seahawks. He wrote his PhD on the demands of football from a Catapult perspective. So if you're not familiar, Catapult is a GPS company that basically pushes out this unit that measures a bunch of biometric information. So he did his PhD on that, and one of the big things he did was define sports science, which is the application of scientific principles to sporting performance. That's my definition of sports science. And that can mean a billion different things. That's a whole other topic, but that's how I see it.
Yeah, so sport is the athletes, the games, the training model and everything. And then science, the scientific method of, you know, justify your question, right? Create a hypothesis and then go and test it and then come up with a conclusion, then ask a better question, you know? And one of my favorite things I heard from you is, I think you asked me, what's my like sports science process? And I was like, oh, you know, you figure out what technology you have, and then you do like a needs analysis and key performance indicators. And then you were like, or I asked you the same question, and you said, I go to a game, figure out their playing style, you know, what are their practices like, and just like sport, but sport specific to your context. You know, the Pac-12 is or USC is a very, football is a quicker pace offense, you know, and if you went with traditional work rest ratios, the example you gave me of, you know, play clock's 40 seconds, a play is 4 seconds, that's like 10-1. But if you're running a quicker style offense, but you train with a traditional, you know, football model, you guys are going to be super underprepared. So sport specific to your context, your team, and then kind of applying the scientific method with technology and whatever it may be. So now, what is the coolest story you have thus far in your sports science and just overall performance career?
Oh man, so the coolest story I have so far was actually this past football season. So I'm fortunate enough to travel with our football team. So back in the day, I was a student at SC, obviously, and anyone familiar with USC, or I mean college football in general, knows that USC Notre Dame is a big time football rivalry, right? Like it's billed as the greatest cross intersectional rivalry in college football, right? So as a student, my senior year, I actually went to South Bend, Indiana. You know, that was like a big trip a lot of students did. So you stay in Chicago and you drive out to South Bend and you watch the game, you go back, hang out in Chicago on that Sunday, and then you fly back. So I did that as a student. I remember sitting in like the highest seat possible. That's a 92,000 person stadium, and I'm in the highest seat. I can literally see over the edge and like see, like, all right, that's the edge of the stadium. Holy crap, it's pretty high up. And I just remember watching that game, and like Adoree Jackson had like an 80-yard touchdown, and Notre Dame ended up winning that game. But I just remember that experience. And then this past season, traveling with the football team, actually being on the sideline at that game, you know, getting to actually see that atmosphere and be a part of that tradition and be a part of that rivalry. Like that's a childhood dream. You know, you've watched that game on TV all the time. And now you're actually actively on the sideline. You're getting texts from your mom being like, hey, look at these pictures of you on TV. I'm like, well, crap, I'm not in the right spot then. I should be on TV. But like the biggest lesson like I learned from that was like, don't be afraid to dream big. And like, you really don't know what's going to happen. Like I would never have imagined myself, like that is the top of the stadium to literally on the field. Like I stood on the ND in the middle, like before the game. You know, that's how crazy is that? Like I was just some random student at SC and now I ended up in that position. So that's the coolest story I've got so far.
That is insane. And it's so cool just to ask that question, just because the variety of answers there are, but just that, like, imagine being on the ND and then you're looking up at the top of the stadium and you're like, I used to be there, you know? That must have been a very, very humbling, but very motivating experience. And that is a super cool story. Yeah. What is the story that you would say is most fundamental that's brought you to right now?
So the most fundamental story, I think, to my own development was actually within the first 2 months of my first internship. So I went into strength conditioning as an unpaid intern working at UCLA, and I was working at a restaurant at the same time. So basically my days would be get in at about 4:45, and I'd leave to go to work at the restaurant at about 6:30. So pretty typical hours for a strength conditioning intern. And then probably finish up at the restaurant at about 11 and then try to get some sleep. And that was my Monday through Friday. And I'm not saying anything that anyone who hasn't interned in S&C hasn't done before. I'm not trying to sound like I worked really hard. Like that's just the reality of the current situation. So I'd been doing that for about 2 months. And I'll be honest, I was struggling. It's a tough life when you first start doing that. Like you got to bring it every single day. The coaches are watching you, the athletes are watching you. And we had 3 performance evaluations. So basically they had a 1 to 5 scale to measure your performance in about 8 different criteria. And they actually went through this in like the indoctrination phase to begin with, to say, hey, this is what we're going to judge you on. And 1 to 5, I got a bunch of 1s and a couple 2s. And that was like shell shock. I'd never seen like that poor of a review. And I just remember looking at this piece of paper being like, holy crap, like, what are they going to say? So about 5 coaches are sitting on the other side of the table. I'm on one side. They all have the same performance eval. I'm looking at it. And one of the coaches, he looked at me. He's like, look, you need to pick it up or you need to quit. He's like, we have 6 other interns here. They're all pulling their weight. It doesn't seem like you're pulling your weight. Like, you're not being paid to be here, so we're not going to fire you. But ultimately, you either need to pick up your pace and get with the program, or you need to find a different profession. And I dedicated a lot of time to it so far. I was like, oh man, like, I'm already like not good enough for this. Like, crap. All right. So sat and thought about it for a long time. And I was like, you know what, if I give it my 110%, just see like what happens. If they still tell me to quit, then fine, I quit. But then it's just not for me. So we were just coming out of summertime. This was a summer to fall internship. So it started in June, ended in December. So September started, UCLA started back up, and I was actually assigned to work with baseball. UCLA baseball at the time was a pretty good team. Now they're probably one of the best teams in the country. So it's pretty cool to work with a team of that caliber. And I remember working with the strength coach, and the way that they had it set up was they would split up the pitchers and the position players. The pitchers would start out in what we'd call the GIF, which is basically just like this big batting cage. And they would do speed work in there for about 45 minutes with another intern. And then they would flip. So there was a weight room on another side of the baseball stadium, and that had about 8 racks in it. So the head strength coach for baseball took 4 racks, and I took 4 racks. And before the session, he said, those are the freshmen. You're in charge of them. If they have any questions, if they need to know anything, you're in charge of them. If they don't make it or they don't pull their weight with the rest of the guys, that's on you. So it's 6 a.m. Like, I ran the warm up for everyone. We all run over, and I'm like, all right, I'm just going to do it. And what was cool is, like, no one's around. It's like 6:15 in the morning in LA. Like, no one's awake. Everyone's driving on the freeway. Like, no one's actually going to pay attention to this. So I just start screaming at people. I'm like, all right, I'm going to own this session. Like, you're going to know who I am by the end of this session. So I'm just making sure everyone's in the right spot. We're going. And the director of strength conditioning actually had a meeting at baseball that day. So he comes around and he's walking into the office, which you can actually see the weight room from. And he told me this story later because I was too busy coaching. He saw me and he's like, who the hell is that? Who is that? And he saw me, and then he actually like talked to the head strength coach later for baseball. And he's like, hey, what's up with Kyle? Like, I didn't know he could do that. And that was the moment right there. They actually told me in my second eval, like, my numbers went up a little bit. It wasn't like I didn't get 5s or anything, but from 1s and 2s to 2s and 3s. Actually got a 4 on like coaching assertiveness or something like that. But that was the moment where I realized, like, okay, I can do this. Like, I can be a strength coach if I need to be. I can ultimately do this job. And that was the most formative experience I had, because I learned, like, if someone gives you a chance and they put you in this position, and you either have to, if you're either going to do well or you're going to fold. Like, what kind of person are you going to be in that role? Like, I'm not the type of person that's like hollering and yelling at people. That's just not who I am. But for that current role, for what I needed to be at that moment, I was going to be someone that yelled at people. So I learned, make the most of the chances you're given, and then be the right person for the role that you're in. It might not seem authentic to you at that time, but that's okay. Your job is to play a role. You're not the head strength coach of the team. You're supporting that coach. You need to do what that coach is telling you to do. So that was the biggest thing that led me to this point, because every other situation I've been in, I've been put in situations where I was like, holy crap, like, I don't know how to do any of this stuff. I've never worked with GPS before. I've never worked with Catapult before. Like, how am I going to support 2 teams? One of these people on this team is going to end up being an MLS player. one of those people on this team is going to play in the WNBA. Like, how am I going to be able to support these people? Like, who am I to even help? Really doesn't matter who you are. Be the right person in that role. So that's the biggest thing that's led me to where I am right now.
Yeah, and when it comes time to walk the walk, whether you feel qualified or confident or whatever word we want to say, there's a lot to be said that people just like figure it out, you know. And one lesson I got out of that story is you never know who's watching.
Oh yeah.
Whether it's explicitly stated or not, that they're going to be there. So that's why you literally have to walk the walk and bring it all the time, you know. And imagine if one day you got off your restaurant shift super late and you woke up super tired and you're kind of just like, oh, I got 50% today. And that was the day of your eval, or that was the day that they had the meeting at the baseball facility, you know? So I think there's a lot to be said to that story of taking criticism, walking the walk. And I like how you said, you know, whatever role you're in that role. So you might as well crush it, you know? And you never know who's going to be there. So I think that has to do with your superiors, but also the ones you're coaching under. You know, if they can see you bringing it every day and they can see you kind of doing what needs to be done, that's going to go a long way with the athletes as well as your superiors, like I said. So that's a really cool story. And I can only imagine you walking out of the facility that day where they were like, you just don't have it, guy, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those like come to Jesus moments where you're just like, man, I've invested so much time in this. Like, this is what I want to be my profession. I don't have a backup plan. There is no plan B. Like, we'll see what happens. And the more and more I thought about that story, like the more and more I've applied that story everywhere I've been. Like, I've always been in a situation where I didn't know what to do. I didn't know whether I was going to succeed in something or not. And what I did was basically just, I don't know, what does the role demand? And then do those things. Like, the biggest thing I actually learned from director of performance at the Memphis Grizzlies, I was actually just chatting with him. And he said, we're also like focused on soft skills. We're also focused on like leadership development and like how to talk to athletes and what cues are you using and all this certain stuff. And he's like, don't worry about that stuff. Like, what job are you doing? Okay, do that job. Just what do you need to know to be good at that job? And then do that job. Like, we focus so much on like, oh, you have to coach them this way. You have to use this Oreo technique where you say something positive, then you say something negative, then you say something positive. Like, no, it's not that cookie cutter. Sometimes someone needs to kick up the ass. Sometimes you need to like put your arm around a dude and be like, hey, is everything okay? Like, there are times for those different things. But if your coach is saying, hey, I need you to be this guy today, be that guy. There's a reason. There's a reason he's asking you to be that guy.
And believing in that as well. You know, if you don't feel qualified, it's like, I'm here for a reason. And to bring this back to the performance evaluation, it's one thing to sit there and take them saying, you should quit, you got all these ones and stuff. But it's another thing to say, okay, why am I getting these ones? What are you guys looking for? And being able to take that extra step, I think is another thing to take out of that story as well.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll say on that is, if you're in a position where you have interns underneath you, or if you have anyone that's working for you, if you're a boss, like, don't be afraid to give harsh criticism. Do not be afraid to criticize people. And obviously be constructive with it. Don't be an asshole. But UCLA, when I was a GA and I was actually on the other side of that table, we would say no cupcakes. Right? You don't give out cupcakes. We're not trying to make you feel good about yourself in that moment. If you're crap, you're crap. If you're great, you're great. Like, we're going to tell you how it is, because lying to somebody and telling them that they're good at something when they're not, like, you're not going to end up with a job in this profession. You will not. Like, people can see through the crap. So giving somebody real criticism or real direction is so valuable. And I can't thank those coaches. The coach that did that in particular is probably my biggest mentor. The one that said that to this day is like one of my biggest mentors in this field. So I really respected that they did that.
Sweet. Cool story. And last one, what is the story you're most proud of thus far?
I think, so I was a performance analytics fellow at Louisville. Basically, all that means is I was a sports science guy for a couple teams, but I also helped people in the weight room. So one of the things that we were tasked with was building out a 42-week, my bad, not a 42, a 52-week program for a team, right? I got assigned to men's soccer because I was working with men's soccer at the time. So my job was to give my overall philosophy, how I would do things from a strength standpoint, a conditioning standpoint, and a sports science standpoint for that team, how I would support that team. So went out and actually built it. And I really like fleshed out my philosophy. So I did like the Simon Sinek, like why, how, what, like why are we even doing this? How are we going to accomplish this? And then what am I actually doing? So that really helped me develop as a coach and as a sports scientist. So gave that presentation to our basically the Louisville sports performance staff. And I remember my boss at the time, Paul, basically saying, look, if you give that presentation to any sport coach in the country, you'll get a job at the Division I level. Like if you give that presentation to anyone, like you will be employed because you have an understanding of why you're doing what you're doing. You know the limitations of what you can and cannot do. And you've obviously proven like what's important and what's not for that particular sport. And that was big for me because he's a military guy, right? He's not the type of person that just like say nice things to people. Like him and I had gotten into it quite a few times before that. So like I was really happy that he actually like gave me that feedback because it meant that he meant it. An addendum on that is the strength coach for men's soccer at the time was actually the director. And he was asked to present at the CSCCA conference on men's soccer. And he asked me, he's like, hey, Kyle, like, you're working with that team every single day, running catapult in meetings, all this stuff. Like, do you want to present with me at the CSCCA? So I'm a fellow, like I'm a paid intern essentially. And I'm presenting at a national conference on men's soccer, basically talking about, hey, like, this is what we do from an analytics standpoint with our soccer team. This is why we do what we do, and this is how we help them win. So that was the story I'm really proud of because that was basically the culmination of like, all right, I could do this. Like, I can be a sports scientist at the Division I level. Like, I can support a team. Like, that's when I knew I was onto something. And the biggest thing I'll take from that is like this. It is related, I promise. Just look outside your field for inspiration within it. So what really molded my philosophy was actually like soccer coaches. So like reading about Pep Guardiola, reading about Brendan Rodgers, reading about these different coaches and how they actually see the game. Because as a strength coach or a sports scientist, supporting that head coach really doesn't matter what I think. Like most college soccer teams on the men's side rarely lift weights in season. Rarely. Like I can attest to that. And Louisville won an ACC championship that year without really lifting weights. That's when I realized just because I'm in the weight room 10 to 12 hours a day doesn't mean the weight room is the most important thing for those kids. Obviously, playing the sport is pretty important for soccer. And that's framed everything in my career. Like, you get better at the sport by playing the sport. So us as support staff really need to be cognizant of, all right, we need to prepare them physically. But if that guy doesn't know how to receive a pass and actually see where he's supposed to pass the ball, I don't care how much he can squat or how high he jumps. So that was huge for me. So that's probably the story I'm most proud of.
How long do you think you spent if you had to put like an amount of hours on it, on that presentation? Or the whole program, sorry.
Oh, man. You're talking about the one I presented to those. Are you talking about the ones I gave to the Louisville people or to the CSCCA?
We'll do both separately.
The Louisville sports performance staff, I probably spent at least 80 hours on it. Spent a lot of time. Probably spent about 6 hours a day for about 2 weeks.
Dang.
And that, it was important to me, you know, because that becomes like when I ended up applying for the job at USC, right? I had my philosophy down. Obviously it was for a different sport, but I basically took that format and then I put it over here, took out a couple slides, and I gave that to every single person in my interview at USC. Like my how, my why, my how, my what. How does that relate to this, this, and this? And I don't know if that got me the job, but it definitely didn't hurt. Like my boss at USC still has it in his office. So like, that's what I'm trying to say. It's like, yeah, you put in the time. I spent 80 hours on it, but that means I spent 20 hours when we did the CSCCA. And then I spent about 5 hours when I did the USC one, changed some branding. And then basically the other 15 preparing for USC was just actually presenting it to different people. Like put in the time, set up a format. Okay, now I've got something to work with.
Yeah, and just getting that big payoff of that positive feedback and just like getting the opportunity to speak at the CSCCA and knowing like I did this, you know, and all those late nights when you're like, gosh, what am I doing? Like this is so extra, you know, whatever. But I can only imagine what that payoff felt like.
It was a great experience. And I've been very fortunate. I'm not going to act like I did all this work and I'm in this position. Like we started this conversation by saying I've only applied for really 2 jobs in my whole career. Okay. So obviously there's been quite a bit of luck involved in this process for me. So I'll be the first person to tell you, once again, the only difference between me and you is a couple people in these different places saying nice things about me. And I genuinely mean that. Like I've put in work and I think I'm damn good at what I do. But ultimately, like you might be damn good at what you do. I don't necessarily know because I haven't seen you work on a daily basis, but you just need people that are going to be in your corner and go to bat for you.
And with people saying nice things about you, it's because you walked the walk. It's because you had that rapport with the person, you know, not just in the first email, you know, you send to someone, hey, you have a job for me? Hey, can you give me, you know, all these 7 people's emails in your network and things like that. And then the last thing about that story about seeking information elsewhere, the only requirement of a soccer athlete, we'll just go with soccer, is to play that sport, you know, and are you so the soccer problem is how do we get more wins? Are you putting your own solutions in the weight room, in the catapult data, your own solutions to their problem, or are you being a tool for them to use? And that's been really helpful, just thinking about how to think about kind of sports science. Am I promoting my own objectives just because this is quote unquote my niche, this is what I do, or am I a tool to help them solve their problem?
Yeah. And that's about us understanding the game, right? This goes back to what we talked about before. Watch the sport. If you watch Louisville men's soccer play, they have a very distinctive style. They possess the ball. If you line up their team versus every other team in the country, they look like that. They're all like 5'8", 5'9", right? Everyone else in the country is these big dudes, all right? That's just a difference in philosophy. Like Louisville men's soccer is all about technical and tactical aspects of the game. So if I see that, I have to think functional minimum for physical. Obviously, psychological is important too, but we're not going to talk about that. Ultimately, like the physical side isn't going to be what wins them a game. What could help another team, let's say the team we lost to that year, Michigan State, right? They were big dudes. Like every single one of those guys on the field were at least 6'1". And they were probably 20 pounds heavier than every guy on our team. And they played a very direct style of soccer. All right, you play like that, okay, you better be able to accelerate. You better be able to be fast. You better be able to get ahead on the ball. Like if I was at Michigan State, I wouldn't treat my job the same as I would at Louisville, because the demands of the game from a coaching perspective and a game model is completely different. So you have to adapt your style to the coach you're with, because I might be a simple back squat, deadlift, clean guy, But if I'm working with soccer and they never lift, when am I going to teach them how to clean? Right? I might as well just let that guy go outside and juggle the ball a little bit more. Maybe that'll probably help us win. It's awesome.
But just to finish up that story before we get on another 2-hour convo is being willing and able to kind of take your ego out and be like, I'm not going to make or break this team. And we've had this conversation before. It's like, how much are you actually contributing? And being able to step back and be like, that it's a very technical team. It's a very technical sport, and that's what they need. And how do I help optimize that as opposed to just promoting your own agenda and objectives and your specific modalities, as opposed to just helping them solve their problems as a tool, kind of like I said. But second to last question, I guess, what's 1 of 3 things that the listener can start doing tomorrow to become better? Okay,
number 1 is develop baseline level of data literacy, right? That's the most important thing. I think most people in the sports sciences, strength and conditioning, anyone that works with athletes at a high school, collegiate, or professional level needs to know how to work with an Excel spreadsheet. And not like, hey, I know how to enter in information, but like understanding how to work with data, like know the difference between a classifier, a parameter, or an instance, okay? If a classifier is like my name, that's a classifier. A parameter would be total distance or heart rate exertion. And an instance would be every single time there's a different one of those things, a different data point being entered into the system. Like that's incredibly important. You'd be surprised by how many people like don't understand basic tabular structure of data. And that's incredibly important moving forward. Like a great resource for learning Excel, specifically if you work in sport, is Excel Tricks for Sport. It's run by a guy named John Leith. Used to work for the New Zealand Institute of Sport. Really smart guy. That's number 1, is develop baseline data literacy. It'll go a long way. And then learn the fundamentals of your craft. So if you're an S&C coach, learn the foundations of biomechanics, anatomy, physiology, cueing, athlete management. If you're a sports scientist, learn about data management, learn about the scientific method. What is that? And then also all those things that the strength coach knows. You need to know about biomechanics. You need to know about anatomy and physiology. Like you need to understand, like we focus so much on leadership skills. Like once again, like I'm going to harp on this. We focus so much on soft skills. It's incredibly important for us to know, okay, when I look at a forced time curve of a jump, why is there a time where I weigh less than gravity when I'm pushing down? Like that sort of stuff. Because we talk about like learning how to decelerate the body, and when we talk about getting better at certain things, are we actually getting better at those things? We can actually measure that stuff now. And then lastly, I think if you really want to differentiate yourself, you have to look for an asymmetry to exploit. By asymmetry, I basically mean like find out what people hate doing and then do that. Be really, really, really good at that. So perfect example is like Bill Belichick, right? So probably the greatest football coach of all time. I hate the New England Patriots, but he's the GOAT of coaches. So everyone hated when he worked with the New York Giants, right? Everyone hated breaking down film. Actually, I think he was with the Colts at this point. Everyone hated breaking down film. And he was a volunteer coach. He wasn't a player at a high level, but he became the best person probably in the league at the time at breaking down film. And it was a painstaking process back then. It was not easy like it is now. And it's not necessarily easy now, but way less complicated. So he got himself a job initially in coaching as someone who wasn't a player by getting really good at film. He could do something that was incredibly important to that staff. So then he got on staffs and ended up becoming that guy. He knew more about the game than anyone because he was watching all that film. So 3 things that I think you could get better at tomorrow was get better with data, learn the fundamentals of your craft, and then find an asymmetry that you can exploit.
Yeah, so being able to fill that role, like you said earlier, and provide that extra value. If you can fill that gap, that asymmetry that's there, you're becoming indispensable because you can do something that no one else can do nor wants to do.
Yeah.
And just becoming data literate, being familiar with other aspects of performance, you can speak that language, and that's going to go a super long way with whoever it may be. If you can speak the language of soccer, if you can speak the language of the strength coach, and then they know that you literally just get it, like as simple as that phrase is, if they know that you get it, they're going to be more comfortable talking to you about this stuff. They're going to be more comfortable asking questions and things like that. So I think that's going to go a super long way. So that was awesome. And I know that you're addicted to your social media. You're blowing it up every day, but where can the listeners get more of you?
Yeah, I'm definitely like probably the least social media literate person you'll ever have on here. But the best way to probably reach me is via LinkedIn. So Kyle Voigt, that just type that in via LinkedIn. You'll probably find me. If you just type that in Google, it'll probably be like the first thing up anyway. And then you can also email me. That's at kvoigt, my last name, at usc.edu. So feel free to hit me up via that. I'm more than willing, especially right now with all this time we've got, like just to basically answer any questions I can and hopefully learn some stuff from talking to different people. So I really appreciate you having me on, Matt, and it was good to flesh out some of these things, and learned a lot just talking to you. So it's been great.
Fantastic. And all of that stuff will be in the show notes and the description and everything to reach out. And I'm impressed we kept this to under 2 hours, and I look forward to chatting next.
Appreciate it. Thanks for your time, Matt.